very good afternoon to everyone. Once again, we have the annual Srikant Dutt Memorial Lecture organized by NEHU Memorial Museum and Library. For this year's lecture, we have Professor B.Subba, whom I'll introduce later, who is speaking on the subject of recreating Srikant Dutt's migration and development, the Nepalese in Northeast. Let me say a few words about Srikant Dutt and what he did. Srikant Dutt was born on November 21st, 1954 in Providence, Rhode Island, USA, of American mother and Indian father. His early schooling was in New York. He graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 1975. With a break of 2 years spent in Japan teaching English to Japanese businessmen, he resumed his higher studies in 1977, joining London School of Economics. There he submitted his dissertation on Bhutan. He was awarded his PhD in 1981 for his thesis on India and the Third World. Srikant, however, did not live to see it published, as he died in December of the same year. Srikant Dutt's interest in different peoples and countries was aroused very early in his short life when he travelled with his parents to India, UK and Japan. He travelled extensively by himself, beginning from the last year of high school. He travelled not so much as a tourist, but as a scholar of political science with an inquiring mind, interested in the peoples and the governments of all these countries. For a young scholar, Srikant Dutt produced a corpus of writing which is impressive both in its quality and in its range. He was deeply concerned with developing nations and their place in the world community, with special reference to India. The NEHU Memorial Museum and Library is fortunate in being associated with Srikant Dutt in a number of ways. He drew substantially on the scholarly materials available with this organization, both for his doctoral dissertation and for the essays he wrote. And the NMML has an endowment in the name of Srikant Dutt instituted by his family, which enables us to organize this very, very important annual lecture in the memory of late Srikant Dutt. Today's talk by Professor B.Subba, the memorial lecture by Professor B.Subba, is on a particular article written by Srikant Dutt, which had turned out to be very, very influential. It remains influential till date. It was published in Economic and Political Weekly in 1981. It is called Migration and Development, the Nepalese in Northeast. So Professor Subba's memorial lecture today is his reflection upon this very important and well-regarded piece of research by Srikant Dutt. Let me now briefly introduce our very distinguished speaker, Professor B.Subba. He is former Vice Chancellor of Sikkim University and Professor of Anthropology at Northeastern Hill University, NEHU. Very, very well-known anthropologist. He has authored and edited 14 books and over 70 articles on various issues related to the people of Eastern Himalayas. His areas of interest are ethnicity and development, politics of culture and identity, and diaspora, He has served on editorial boards of several national and international journals and has been on the advisory boards of several national institutions in India, like the Anthropological Survey of India, Indian National Trust for Arts and Cultural Heritage, and Indira Gandhi Rashtriya Manav Sangrahalaya. He has also held prestigious fellowships like the Homi Bhabha Fellowship, Dad Guest Professorship, and Baden-Württemberg Fellowship. In 2016, the Asiatic Society, Calcutta, conferred on him the R.P. Chanda Centenary Medal for his contribution to anthropology. During the last 1 year or so, he was the chairman, Learning Outcome-Based Curriculum Framework, LOCF, for Anthropology, appointed by the University Grants Commission. As I said at the beginning, it is our great pleasure that we have Professor B.Subba for this year's Srikant Dutt Memorial Lecture, and may I now request him to please proceed with his lecture. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My greetings to the family members of Srikant Dutt who are present here. Learned audience here, some of who I recognize, most of who I don't. But I hope whatever I'm going to speak on will have some resonance in whatever is your kind of academic engagement or otherwise. I am particularly thankful to the previous director of NEHU Memorial Museum, Sakti Sinha ji, for having invited me to deliver this lecture. Actually, the invitation was for last year, and I couldn't make it last year because it clashed with my examination duty at NEHU. So I recused myself last year, but I couldn't evade it this year. So I'm here. I'm also thankful to Iqbal Ahmed for making all the arrangement for my coming and for my stay here. I normally do not like others reading out lectures, even if they are very formal. But I would like to do that this afternoon, so that I remain focused and I finish my lecture within the time allotted to me. I never met Srikant Dutt, but if he was leaving, perhaps we would be more or less of same age, and we would be contemporaries. And that's why whenever I refer to him, I refer to him by the first name. Although it's okay to refer to even those who are a little senior by the first name. So the title of my lecture this afternoon is Rereading Srikant Dutt's Migration and Development, the Nepalese in Northeast. This is a kind of appreciatory reading of his write-up. I don't call it article because Economic and Political Weekly has a category of articles, and they are different from the commentaries and other write-ups which are published by Economic and Political Weekly. So, to start with, 6 months before Srikant Dutt breathed his last, his write-up titled Migration and Development, the Nepalese in Northeast, published in 1981, was published in the Economic and Political Weekly, which is one of the most respected and widely circulated social science journals published from Mumbai. In fact, this is the most widely circulated in the entire world, actually. I first read it in 1982 when I was writing my thesis on the Nepalese of Darjeeling and Sikkim, who have ethnic affinity with the Nepalese in Northeast, but who are not as vulnerable as them. I have also referred to this publication in my thesis. Hence, rereading it after almost 4 decades of its publication is exciting for me, and that is what I wish to do in my lecture this afternoon. Kaushik, who later became the chief economic advisor to the UPA-II government of India and the chief economist of the World Bank from 2012 to 2016, wrote the following in 1982 in his obituary on Srikant Dutt. Quote, "In the summer of 1981, he, that is Srikant Dutt, had trekked through the Himalayas because he was interested in the hill people and wanted to write about them. During his last days, one of his main preoccupations was with northeastern India and the plight of its people." Unquote. Srikant's write-up in question does not come as a surprise in the backdrop of what Kaushik Basu wrote about Srikant as someone preoccupied with Northeast India. Srikant rightly begins his write-up with one of the most important issues of Northeast India, that is the issue of foreigners who are seen as a threat to the local indigenous peoples. The local leaders never miss the opportunity of reminding one about Tripura, where the people from erstwhile East Bengal, and Sikkim, where the people from Nepal and Darjeeling have overwhelmed the local population over the years and made them politically insignificant through, of course, a democratic process. The responses of the local people to the threat perceived by them have often been violent and at times gruesome. One may recall what happened in the Nelly massacre of 1983 in Assam, which led to the death of more than 2,000 persons belonging to a certain community, and what happened during the anti-foreigners movement led by the All Assam Students Union, or ASU, from 1979 to 1985, which made several thousand Bengalis and Nepalis homeless, spurring similar incidents in other states of the region in its aftermath. Although the first such incident involving the Nepalese of Mizoram and Meghalaya had taken place way back in 1967 itself, the scale of violence against the Nepalese was lesser in other states of the region compared to what happened in Assam and Meghalaya. Although the tension between them and the local people might have simmered for a while, the region saw a sudden eruption of students' unions in Meghalaya, Mizoram, Nagaland, and Manipur in early 1980s. Following the footsteps of ASU, even the constitution of these students' bodies were exactly same, including the commas and full stops of what the ASU constitution was. Carrying out similar movements against who they called foreigners in their respective states, resulting in forcible eviction, destruction of houses and other properties, and most importantly, the severing of trust between the local and outsider communities, which had taken decades to build and nurture. In those mayhems, the most frequent victims were Bengali Muslims and Nepali Hindus, who had made this region their home over the past 2 centuries or so. Srikant is absolutely right when he writes about the Nepalese with ESC, with the suffix ESC, that they are, quote, only technically foreigners and to simply dismiss them as foreigners would be incorrect, unquote. According to the concise Oxford Dictionary, the suffix ese refers to the inhabitants or language of a country. Hence, Nepalese, as spelled by Srikant, refers to the inhabitants or language of Nepal, whereas Nepali, without the suffix ese, may or may not refer to the inhabitants or language of Nepal. That is why I prefer to use the word Nepali, and by this I also mean Gorkha or Gorkhali. Indeed, a large number of them are citizens of India, and their lingua franca, Nepali, is one of the national languages of India. It is recognized as an Indian language not only by the Sahitya Academy, which is India's National Academy of Letters, but also by several Indian universities like Calcutta University, which was the first to recognize it, North Bengal University, Guwahati University, and Banaras Hindu University. It is not only an Indian language by virtue of being included in the 8th schedule to the Constitution of India, but even its roots are Indian. It traveled to Nepal with those Hindus who fled India during the rise of the Mughal rule in early 16th century, became a different language through interaction with Tibeto-Burman languages of Nepal, and came back to India in the 19th century only to be labeled as a foreign language, not just by ordinary citizens of our country, but even by responsible leaders, like one former governor of Assam, who also happened to be a retired Lieutenant General of Indian Army and one of the former Prime Ministers of India. In the backdrop of such ignorance in India about Nepalese and the Nepali language, Srikant's write-up is a welcome publication, as it clears a lot of air about their history and their nationhood. About their Hindu identity, the Nepalis are religiously described in South Asia as Hindus. However, Srikant writes, quote, the Nepalese were and are nominally Hindu, having more direct links to the cultural heartland of South Asia, that is, the Indo-Gangetic Valley, whereas the areas in which they were to be, that is, Northeast India, encouraged to settle, were culturally and religiously different, often Tibetan Buddhist, animist, and later Christian, with ties in other directions, unquote. Actually, it may not be wrong to label most Nepalis in India as multi-religious. I see no reason why one person should have only one religious affiliation, albeit for the purpose of census, multiple identities of any kind are an issue. Excepting those who are Christians, they indeed follow more than one religion without the least sense of contradiction about their religious identities. It is common to see a Hindu Nepali go to a Buddhist monastery for offering prayers, and a Buddhist Nepali offering prayers at a Hindu temple, while both Hindu and Buddhist Nepalis subscribe to many animistic beliefs and practices. Similarly, the ethno-medicine men, the sacred priests belonging to one religion, are also invited by followers of other religions, which sometimes surreptitiously include even the Christians. Now, Nepali migration to Northeast India forms a major chunk of his writing, so I devote more paragraphs to this. For the migration of Nepalis to the region, Srikant alludes to the dictates of the world capitalist development. The frontier or peripheral areas, according to him, get drawn into this form of development under pressure from more developed, which he calls more exploited, areas, and such areas by their very nature fall prey to capitalist mode of development. He writes, quote, it is not so much the prospect of avariciously exploiting the defenseless indigenous people of the Northeast, where the prospect of land is a strong motive for migrants like Nepalis, but the fact that outsiders are driven to migrate through their own dire poverty and are seeking a means of continued survival, unquote. And he writes further, quote, "This is the case of the Nepali migrant, who are relatively more skilled hill agriculturists than other hill peoples," unquote. He also mentions the lack of cultivable land, population explosion, and the overall ecological and economic crisis in Nepal as factors forcing them to migrate to different countries in South Asia. Srikant correctly identifies some strong pull factors for the migration of Nepalese to Northeast India. One of these is the active encouragement given to them by the British to join their armed forces, which ultimately led to their settlements in different parts of India and other British dominions in South Asia since early 19th century. He also draws our attention to the Indo-Nepal Friendship Treaty of 1950, the Tripartite Delhi Agreement of 1951, and the revised Indo-Nepal Agreement of 1956, which gave reciprocal rights to the nationals of Nepal in India and Indians in Nepal. He writes, quote, "Therefore, before one accepts or adopts the silent invasion rhetoric of some of the chauvinistic movements in the Northeast, one must understand the actual history of Nepalese migration and settlement in South Asia," unquote. According to his estimates, there are about 2.5 million Nepalese living outside Nepal, of which a large majority of them are in India, and 3 to 4 million, higher number, please, Indians residing in Nepal. But I think these estimates are a little misleading, for the Nepalese in India as well as Indians in Nepal. The population of Indians in Nepal is always estimated to be smaller, but economically a lot more powerful, being in control of Nepal's trade and industry, than that of Nepalese in India. The 1,758-kilometer long border between India and Nepal being porous and unregulated, it is virtually impossible for anyone to give the exact figures for the Indian emigrants to Nepal or the Nepali immigrants to India on any particular date. Srikant shows how a lot of Nepali settlements in India had actually taken place due to official sponsorship of the British government. By creating resettlement colonies for the retired Gorkha army or paramilitary forces in different strategic locations of the country, especially in Northeast India. The British not only rewarded their loyal ex-soldiers but also took care of their strategic needs, which Srikant has not discussed but which, to the best of my knowledge, were not only to have a reserve of trained personnel for watching and containing the rebellious hill tribes, or they were called plundering or marauding hill tribes, from plundering the revenue-rich plains areas, the tea gardens, etc., but also to farm soldiers from within the British territory, as recruiting them from Nepal, which they wanted very much, was not always easy, nor was it permitted by some of the rulers of Nepal, like Jang Bahadur Rana. He, however, points out that the British encouragement to settle down was not just for the retired soldiers, but also for the peasants, especially those from the eastern part of Nepal, who subsequently taught the people of Northeast region the technology of terrace farming. Such encouragement by the British government in Darjeeling, Sikkim and Bhutan in particular was, according to him, quote, "done with a view to binding these states more closely to the Indian Empire and keeping out what they saw as threatening Chinese and Tibetan influence," unquote. He also mentions the role of the Border Roads Organization in their migration to hill areas of Northeast India as construction workers, which eventually led to their settlement in those areas. And he knew the modus operandi of the Nepali immigrants better than any other scholar, which is clear from what he wrote, quote, "Not just as road labor, but even as peasant settlers, the Nepalese do not usually pass formally through checkposts or apply for meaningless scraps of paper. They merely clear the land, often with connivance of local vested interest. It can often be several years before the authorities take any notice, unquote. Talking about checkpoints, allow me to say a few words about what I have experienced myself and written about, quite extensively actually. In spite of the Indo-Nepal treaties and protocols, every Nepali traveling by bus from Siliguri to northeast India used to be asked to get down at 2 immigration checkposts, one at Srirampur Hat in Assam and another at Banihat in Meghalaya. I went through the harassments at these 2 checkposts myself many times, despite holding the identity card of an Indian university teacher, and how I had to bribe my way through so that I would not have to miss the bus I was traveling in. Luckily for me and others who share my ethnicity, the High Court of Guwahati gave a judgment, sometimes in 2006, maybe April or May, on a public interest litigation filed by a Nepali lawyer practicing at the same court, which declared stopping the Nepalis at the immigration checkposts in India illegal. With reference to the migration of Nepalis to Sikkim and Bhutan, besides official policy of the British, Srikant mentions about the active connivance of the local elites. He writes, quote, Nepalese settlement was not just encouraged by the British. A role was also played by the local feudal elites. In both Sikkim and Bhutan, certain local aristocrats gained lucrative incomes by giving tenancy and land rights to Nepalese immigrants in jungle areas. In Sikkim, the Kajis of Khangsarpa clan were from the 1870s intimately involved in Nepali settlement. In Bhutan, the powerful Dorje family, previously of low rank in the feudal aristocracy, enhanced its political and economic status by playing an intimate part in Nepalese settlement in southern Bhutan. In Manipur, it was the royal court which gained financially by granting lands for Nepali settlement, unquote. He also has written a little bit about why Nepali language was not recognized by the government of India for very long. When he wrote, the movement was already about 20 years old, but the government of India had not done anything about it, had not responded positively. So he writes about that as well. About the reason for the government of India not granting the demand of the Nepalis in India for official recognition of their language, he wrote, quote, one reason that India has not acceded to the demand is that it has not wished to legitimize the presence of almost 2 million Nepalese residing in India. Rather, India has wished to ambivalently keep the Nepalese beneath the surface of India's political and economic life, unquote. Their language was finally recognized by Government of India in June 1992, almost 10 years after what he wrote, along with Konkani and Manipuri languages, but there could be other reasons as well for the Government of India to not grant this demand till 1992, one of which was the widely held view in India that Nepali was a foreign language. As someone who had participated in the language movement in 1970s in my school and college days, I remember one other reason for the delay doing the rounds those days, which was non-recognition of Hindi as a national language by Nepal. Finally, what seems to have worked behind the recognition by the Government of India is the active lobbying with those national leaders who mattered by Narvadur Bhandari, the then Chief Minister of Sikkim, and his wife Dilkumari Bhandari, who was then a member of Parliament from Sikkim. Yet, 2 years later, he lost the power, making way for Dr. Pawan Chamling, who ruled the state for 25 long years without a break, which is a record of sorts for the Chief Ministers of India. some concluding remarks. Allow me to quote the last paragraph where Srikant sums up his thoughts on the Nepalese of Northeast thus. Quote, Nepalese settlement in the Northeast has not been part of an insidious scheme, but is the outcome of the development process itself, in which the Nepalese as a poor and mobile hill community play a part in frontier areas where roads are being built, towns are being founded or expanded, and the area is being more fully exploited. As long as the peoples of the Northeast do not analyze the economic realities of their own position and the economic realities of any frontier region, they will persist in pursuing millennial dreams of a glorious past. One set of outsiders will merely be replaced by others if those who are indigenous to the area do not seek to develop their own resources through their own efforts. Unquote. One may draw the following conclusions from Srikant's write-up. 1. He rightly placed the migration of Nepalese to Northeast India in the theoretical framework of a frontier region, exposed to an exploitative world economy. He also argued that their migration was not part of any sinister design, as suspected by the protagonist of the Greater Nepal theory, but an inevitable development typical of almost all frontier regions that are sparsely populated. To him, if it were not Nepalese going there, it would be some other people. In fact, when Nepalese were evicted from Meghalaya, they were replaced by Biharis. It appears that he was inspired by the world systems theory of Immanuel Wallerstein, which was published in 1976 for the first time, although he doesn't mention the source of his intellectual inspiration in his write-up. 2. Although the sources of his information on Nepal and the Nepalese are not provided by him, except one book edited by Upadhyay and Abuba and published from Kathmandu in 1975, there is no doubt about the fact that he was very widely read about Nepal, as well as the Nepalese living outside Nepal. Without such wide reading, it would not be possible for him to have such a good grasp of migrant community that is one of the most diverse in terms of history, language, culture, religion, race, and what have you. 3. In April 1980, Kalimpong is the new district of West Bengal, bordering Bhutan. Kalimpong-based organization called Pranta Parishad, led by a well-known theater artist, launched the Gorkhaland movement, and in July the same year, another organization called the Gorkha National Liberation Front, led by an ex-corporal of Indian Army, launched a violent movement for achieving the same goal, that is, a separate state called Gorkhaland within the Union of India, comprising Darjeeling district and Doos area of Jalpaiguri district of West Bengal. The years 1980 to 88 saw numerous academics and journalists from Kolkata as well as North Bengal writing how illegitimate the movement was. Not just because the people who were demanding separation from West Bengal were all immigrants from Nepal, but also they were part of a sinister design of Nepal to wrest away the Nepali-speaking areas of Darjeeling and Jalpaiguri from India, which were under Nepal for some time, for about 30 years. They even justified the violent clampdown and the gross violation of human rights of the hill people by the government of West Bengal, led by none other than Jyoti Basu, one of the tallest communist leaders India produced, and who was literally worshipped by a huge section of Nepali CPIM cadres living in the tea gardens of Darjeeling or in the agricultural villages of Kalimpong. Bongo Vongo Hute Devona was or will not allow the partition of Bengal, second partition of Bengal, was the bottom line for his government, no matter how many Nepalese were given third-degree torture at the local police stations, including my father and brother, disabling many of them for life. All this happened without Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which is the reason why I mentioned this in particular. While talking about Armed Forces Special Powers Act, at this Joystree Memorial Lecture in JNU 2 years back in November 2017, where I was perhaps in a wrong place to argue that Armed Forces Special Powers Act should not go. And I gave this example to say that even without Armed Forces Special Powers Act, the human rights can be violated by the state, and they can go to any extent in this regard. During this period, I remember approaching PUDR and PUCO, but they also were busy somewhere else, and they didn't really send any representative to Darjeeling to look into the human rights violations. I've written about it extensively, of course. The police atrocities would not have happened without clear orders from the state government. But even the lower judiciary turned its proverbial blindfolded eyes to what was happening in the hills during those 8 years. In this backdrop, the article by Srikant stands out as it has no signs of Bengali chauvinism or nationalism that informed most writings in those tumultuous years in Darjeeling. I had myself published 2 newspaper articles in 1980 in a very widely circulated English weekly named Himalayan Observer, condemning the Gorkhaland movement. But when I found almost every academic and journalist from Kolkata and North Bengal deriding my community rather than deriding the movement, which they were well entitled to, I turned an approver and wrote several issues of an English pamphlet titled The Gorkha Diary, which the Times of India, on the basis of which the Times of India reported extensively and also said that there is a foreign hand behind this. And later wrote the now out-of-print book titled Ethnicity, State and Development, a case study of Gorkhaland movement in Darjeeling. I knew I was standing on the wrong side of the history, but someone had to do that to give voice, no matter how feeble, to the marginalized hill people of West Bengal. Now the last para. At the end, I would like to state that while a small class of intellectuals has emerged among Indian Nepalese today, there is little improvement in the predicament of the working class Nepalese, even after more than 7 decades of India's independence. They continue to be the targets of the local ire or anger, whether they are engaged in rat hole mining in the Jaintia hills of Meghalaya, risking their lives every moment, or eking out a paltry living in some forest or border villages of the region like Langpi, or supply milk from door to door, etc. Finally, I think the community needs many more such informed writings as the one by Srikant, as there are always more ignorant than informed individuals in this world. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you very much, sir, for your very insightful and fascinating lecture on the subject Rereading Srikant Dutt's Migration and Development, the Nepalese in Northeast. We are, as Nehru Memorial as a family, is very, very thankful to you for having consented for this memorial lecture. And since we don't have questions and answers in this lecture, we can straight away